We're back here on the program Jones and Company, and we are having a conversation with Senator Fred Mitchell. And Senator, we note with interest that the Progressive Liberal Party has a convention coming up, and you are not running for the leadership nor the deputy leadership of the party.
No, I'm not.
Why?
I'm not a member of Parliament, and I decided that even though the rules don't require it, I think that effectively, unless you want to end up in a situation like the F&M did last year, effectively you need the leader and deputy leader to be in the House. So that was the decision.
But you're a senator. You're in the upper house.
But it's a derived power, So anytime somebody wakes up on the wrong side of the bed, you're gone, and that platform had disappeared. So that was just my view. It's a peculiar view, and a lot of people have tried to persuade me otherwise. But I think that's the view.
Can you tell us who you're supporting?
Brave Davis.
Brave Davis?
Yes, right. No question. Yeah.
Why?
I think that there's a requirement now for stabilizing presence. The history of the PLP is largely hierarchical. So when the number one goes, the number two gets it. That's what I think is the mood of the organization. And so you need to have someone who is in that position who can basically stabilize things, who's able to put and employ resources toward doing all of the reform measures which are necessary. And I think he lends a presence to that. He's in fact been the kind of Mr. Fix-It for a generation. And in a sense, it's his turn.
What is the mood of the PLP?
I think people are enlivened and excited by the opportunity that we return to normalcy, in the sense that people's ambitions can be expressed, and that you're going to have a good contest, and there's a promise to return to conventions every year. And I think people will love that.
What do you say about the last 4 months of the new government? I know that you've been in the newspapers on various issues, but to summarize it, what do you think of the first 4 months?
Well, I told PLPs they got a term. This new government has 60 months in the administration, 4 are down and 56 to go. And we have a lot of work to do in those 56 months, each day, trying to get the Bahamian people to accept the PLP as the next administration for this country. So one of the things I've been trying to do is to get people to stop wringing their hands and say, oh, we lost this election on the 10th of May, how dreadful, how terrible. A lady who's a former teacher from Sounds Primary School saw me in the supermarket. She said, boy, I was going to call you, but then I hear you saying on that note you sent around, don't come telling me I'm sorry up in the supermarket. Say, you don't want to hear that, right? So I wouldn't call you. But I mean, that's my view. Enough of that now, Let's get moving. And I think we're really at that point now. Conventions coming up, so we're at that point. And I think you've got enough of a demonstration to see over these 4 months where these fellas are headed. Took a vacation, came back with no legislation, adjourned the House again, came back on the 13th of September, came back on the 20th of September, read some communications, and then adjourned the House again. So it shows you that they don't have a program, they don't have an agenda. And it's just the PLP is crooked, the PLP is dishonest, the PLP did this. They open up the files, oh, look what the PLP did, and they're still doing that. Well, that's going to run out at some point. I warn them, put money on the ground in Grand Bahama, or you're going to have a problem. You're going to have social disorder. And that's exactly what's happening. The morale in Grand Bahama is low. There's no employment there. There's no cash on the ground there. And that's what we face. So, you don't wish them to be unwell, but you observe the fact that they're not as prepared as they should have been for the business of government. And Minnis is now developing the reputation of being the prime minister of touring. I said to a PLP meeting the other day, he must have been to church on Sunday, and prayed for this hurricane to come. Because when the hurricane comes, he doesn't have to answer any questions about public policy. He just says, I think he had a national address, and he told people, what did he say? Say, oh, take the hurricane seriously. A national address, on a hurricane that the forecasters have already said is probably going to skirt the eastern edge of the country. I'm not trying to minimize it, but the fact is it's time for us to get back to work on substantive issues. And one of the substantive issues, for example, is to take the hurricane, because there are a lot of policy issues which are connected with the hurricane. I issued a policy document in consultation with the leader of the opposition in my role as shadow foreign minister. And I said, should we not now in the Caribbean and in the Bahamas turn our attention to the actual practical problems of the weather as we find it? We know that climate change is the underlying issue. We also know that we're in a problem with the United States that its leaders do not now agree that that's the issue. But we also know that the weather is bad and it's ruining the shoreline and it's taking the roofs off the houses. You look at what happened in Dominica and you look at what happened in Barbuda, and it has to do with the codes, it has to do with the protections of the seawalls. So our countries have to all now concentrate on what do we do to mitigate and adapt. And should we not turn our attention to that? And I think that would be a useful thing for Dr. Minnis to do with his administration, to gather with other CARICOM leaders and determine how we are going to finance mitigation and adaptation. That's the issue.
But Mr. Mitchell, is a bigger problem than that. In many of these Caribbean islands, there's been total disruption because all of them are principally tourism destinations. And the infrastructure has been virtually eliminated, you know, when you look at the northern Eastern Caribbean. And the second problem is, most of these countries don't produce any food.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And so that's why I'm saying the focus has to be, for example, one of the issues the Bahamas has to face is, of all the hurricanes that took place, Joaquin, then Irma, Harvey, and Matthew in the last 3 years, of all the hurricanes that have affected this country, none of them have actually been a direct hit on New Providence. And this is the engine of the country. So our planners, our leaders ought to be thinking of that scenario. What happens if something happened like what happened in Puerto Rico and in Dominica? The hurricane passes directly over New Providence with 155-mile-an-hour winds. What do we do? Are we ready? And how fast can we get our infrastructure back up? I mean, I was looking at the modalities or the methods that the present government employed in looking at the hurricane damage or responding to the hurricane, okay? And here's what it is we've done this from Jean, Francis, Wilma, Michelle, Irma, Matthew. Hurricane happens, we jump on a plane the next day, we go down to the communities, we inspect with the cameras, all the politicians are there, we look, and then we come back and say, okay, we're gonna get the public service and get them going. But I thought to myself as I saw Jeff Lloyd standing up in the abandoned school in Ragged Island, why don't you just get on a boat and bring the tractors the same time with the contractors, just start building the school back? What you gotta wait for? You don't have to come and inspect damage to see it. We know the damage is there. Your people, your eyes on the ground could have told you the damage. Just get to work.
This is a criticism you're making now of successive governments,
yes,
including the PLP government.
Right, well, that's what I said.
Yeah.
That's the modality we've been following. But you know, these folk came to office saying they were going to be different from us. As a matter of fact, their partisan supporters have said, oh, you know, Dr. Minnis has been so proactive. This is so new. This is so different. And I said to my branch when I was speaking to them, I said, look, you know, if you took Dr. Minnis's picture out of these pictures taken today and you stuck Perry Christie's picture in there, you wouldn't notice the difference, because that's the same thing that was done last year.
Is NEMA ready? NEMA as an organization to get us where we ought to be in terms of hurricane preparedness and how we respond to these hurricanes?
My impression is that they have the training. My impression is they have the capacity. I think the resources, that's the issue. I don't think they have sufficient resources to mobilize in time. For example, we were a bit panicked during the summertime when we understood that of the 9 boats that the new Defense Force boats, 5 of them were not operational, and 3 of the the 3 aircraft were not operational. So there are a lot of things that have to do to support what NEMA does. And there's, this country has a bureaucratic problem. We love paper and we love filling out forms, when in fact what you need to do is to deliver the goods straight away.
Mr. Mitchell, our region has serious financial resources limitations, all right? We also know that our region is the most vulnerable region among the small island development states in terms of natural disasters, right? I hold the view that in view of the fact that these colossal hurricanes are increasing in frequency, we're going to have to rely on outside sources for funding. Now, you were in Addis Ababa when the global community met to generate funds to address the issues of vulnerability for small island development states, right? What is being done to activate that so that the Caribbean, in its present dilemma, can get some assistance?
Well, the problem is this. The Green Climate Fund, which came out of that process in Ethiopia, is supposed to be $100 billion. The developed countries supposedly accepted the responsibility for the creation of this problem that we now find.
Yes.
And they were supposed to put aside $100 billion. So far, only $10 billion have been set aside. And now you find the United States has said they're not going to contribute at all. So they're not part of it because they're withdrawing from the Climate Fund arrangements. CARICOM, I'm advised, is convening a donors conference in a short while as a result of these present hurricanes. I think the Canadians have said that they will participate. I imagine the United States will participate in other countries. And the French, yeah, given their colonies, and the Dutch as well. So that is going to happen. But I fear that at the end of the day, given that countries and the international institutions have not accepted the GDP per capita is not the measure to determine whether you get concessionary loans. I fear that we're going to have to do what the Bahamas did last year. And
borrow some money.
You had to go and borrow money from the market. Because
not from the fund.
Right. If you get it from the Green Climate Fund, you get it at very low interest rates. Yeah. But if you have to go to the market, that's an issue.
This insurance business, does it make sense? The PLP government withdrew from this Caribbean insurance company. The Minister administration decided that they would pay. What do you say?
I think we wisely made the decision on advice that given the track record of payments, given the way the insurance was written and the triggers which were in the insurance, that it was not providing value to the extent that we expected. And so the advice was to self-insure, which would essentially mean that you set aside the sum of money that you would normally pay to the insurance in a fund, and then you just draw down on that if you needed to do so for infrastructure. So that was the thinking.
But governments don't have the discipline for that.
They may not, but I made another suggestion in this policy paper, which I think the leader of the opposition has accepted. My own view was that, as I said, my criticism of the approach to this hurricane relief effort is it is overly bureaucratic. And my view is that the thing should be privatized in this sense. You know that there's a deposit corporation for banks. In other words, if you have an amount in a bank which is below 50,000 and the bank goes under, you get your 50,000 back because there's insurance which is covering that deposit up to 50,000. So I said, what if you have, the government have an insurance company and everybody's home is guaranteed up to a certain level and you pay an insurance or the government makes a deposit to that insurance per household. And that takes care of an individual household's needs should it be triggered in a hurricane. So you can do that by legislation.
But what about the fact that the insurance company may say, if you got $1 million house and the government insurance is only $50,000, you're underinsured.
No, I'm saying this, that you can write specific triggers which deal with a specific amount. For example, during Hurricane Matthew, I would dare say that $2,500 given to each householder, they could have fixed their own house. And just say, look, here's a one-off cash payment. And I said that to the government. You know, it's just cheaper for you. All this nonsense about come in, fill a form, go inspect, do this, do the next thing. Just say to the householder, $2,500 is what the government has given. Go knock yourself out once you fix the house, once you fix the roof. And I think people, that's what I mean by privatizing the function. So it's not a government function of making the repairs. Now the question for the general insurance that you're talking about is about the infrastructure. And that's where the argument ensued. I think they said in Hurricane Joaquin that it was a flooding event and not a wind event. And so therefore the insurance didn't pay. Well, everybody was quite surprised at that. And of course they go back and read the fine print. Yeah, that's what it says. So insurance company gets away. So the idea was to sit down with CRIF and say, here is what we want to do. We want to redefine the terms of the insurance. And in the meantime, we'll just set aside the money for ourselves. Now, another government can come and make another decision. They have the authority, they have the power. What I don't like is for them to suddenly say the PLP was lying, the PLP was dishonest, so on and so forth. If you want to make that decision, go do it on your own. Don't blame us. We made a decision. We were properly advised. We made the right decision. We had the authority to make the decision. You make another decision. You could explain your decision. That's your decision. And of course, you're the government, so you do it.
When we return, Mr. Mitchell, we want to talk a little bit more about statecraft, and there are some questions I'm sure Mr. Enos would have for you on that as well. We take this break here on Jones & Company. We'll come right back.